Welcome. My name's Didici, and I'm the founder and the director of astrology.com.au. Not specifically a Vedic astrology site. That particular site focuses more on Western style astrology. We have a little bit on Vedic astrology, but here I'd like to focus on some of those elements of Vedic astrology and how I actually work, because a lot of people ask me, both lay people and practitioners alike. This, I guess, will be more for the practitioner. We're going to get into some technicalities here, so I thought I'd better let you know that beforehand, so you don't curse me after 10 or 15 minutes when you'd realize that you could have spent that 15 minutes on something more enjoyable. So there's other stuff there for you, but for those of you who are the connoisseurs of the art, here's a case in point, and it's the national horoscope of Greece, which, as we all know, is in the news big time right now with what's happening with the Central European Bank, International Monetary Fund, and the financial crisis there. So as you can see here, the date is April 6, 1821. That's the independence chart in Kalavrita, Greece. This, as you know, is the chart. It gives the proud sign of Leo, the ascendant, with the north and south node axis moving across this east-west part of the horoscope. That's very significant in itself. That's the first thing we see that's a significant feature. So there is strong karmic energy here. It's interesting too that the south node here in the rising sign does show somewhat austerity. This is what we call the moksha planet, or the planet of asceticism, monastic life. There are some aberrations caused by the east-west axis of north node, south node. And so this does very strongly impact Greece, and has a lot to say about it, maybe having to go back into its past to see why exactly now these problems have occurred. I always say that the karma of any individual or nation is very much like a comet. The tail of the comet is always following the comet. That's past action that we have sort of gone through, those decisions we've made in the past, our conduct, not just as individuals, but in this case, as a nation, will very strongly be influencing the conditions now. That is a lesson in the process of action and reaction, or the law of karma, that, sure, what you sow you shall reap, but what you're reaping right now is also what you've sowed. And people often forget that, and I think Greece, apart from hammering the EU on its particular situation and how difficult they're making it, no one seems to be taking too much responsibility for that past action, which is indicated here. By the way, I always like to use the secondary chart here, which is a map of the current moment that an inquiry is entered into, and that's always useful in identifying very specific issues that are going on at the time of the question that relate back to the horoscope. Almost every time I do one of these charts, if a client comes to me and I prepare the horoscope, what we call the prashna, or the horary chart, the moon will often be in the very, very same position, or in the triangular signs. Here we see at the moment that we're questioning this, the moon is in the sign of Capricorn at 19 degrees, 13 minutes of the star Shravana. In other words, it's in its own moon, because Shravana is ruled by the moon. Interestingly, at the time of the incorporation of Greece, at the time of independence, the moon was in the triangular sign of Taurus at 20 degrees. They're almost what we call a partile trine, a very exact trine. So we can see that this chart is fit to be read. And here it's interesting that the planets Venus and Jupiter are influencing the moon. We'll talk about that in a moment. I want to come back to the chart. I just wanted to just show you the secondary chart that should always be there in the background whenever you're conducting any sort of inquiry. So we talked about this east-west axis being pivotal to the Greek horoscope, and the inflexibility of the government right now is quite interesting, shown by the sign of Leo. Pride, regality, ruled by the sun. But here, the second very, very significant feature that you can see is this stellium of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 planets in this watery sign of Pisces, in the less than desirable 8th house. 8th house is the house of debt, by the way. And having Lord of the 12th house moon, Lord of expenses, the moon in the 10th house, exalted. It's its exalted sign. Then we see that the expenses, it comes back to that past habits, the past karma of the nation or the individual, showing us that 10th house is the government, by the way. Absolutely no doubt that this government has been profligate in the way that it's spent the money of the people, negligent in collecting taxation. So, it's one thing to beat up the EU, and I'm not a fan of the EU by any means, but we do see that you've got to have a balance, and particularly if you're doing astrology, we all have our own opinions, but when it comes to conducting a chart like this, we have to look at all sides of the equation, and very much like journalists, or rather good journalists, our opinion should be put aside in the interest of just simply studying the patterns in the horoscope and expressing what the astrological opinion is. Of course, intuition has to play a large part of this. So this 8th house, along with the exalted moon ruling the 12th, are not at all good omens for this horoscope. We see here, in terms of the actual cycles, that Mercury, it's interesting. This is quite an anomaly, and this is where we have to look more deeply. Most astrologers would immediately look at the Mercury as the planet of gain, ruling the 2nd house of Virgo, and this 11th house of Gemini. However, we can immediately see that Mercury is debilitated in the 8th house, yet at the same time in its retrogression. So this is quite interesting. The debilitation of the 2nd and 11th lords shows that the losses, or the bleeding, I guess, on that government level would have started very, very intensely around 2003. We saw the crisis in 2007, 2008 with the economic meltdown, that global financial crisis. And we see here very much how the planetary rulership of Greece, associated with its profitability, its incomes, going to the house of loss, debilitation. There is some argument to be put forward here that there is a cancellation of that debilitation by virtue of the planet Mercury being with Jupiter, the ruler of that particular sign. It doesn't get any cancellation with respect to the moon or with respect to the ascendant, because the position of Mercury is not angular to either of those points in the horoscope. So I still usually look at this as a problem. If we look at the lunar star of Mercury, we see that it's very, very uncomfortable here. Yes, in debilitation, but in a partile conjunction, in an exact conjunction, applying, it's the planet in the lower degree to this one, applying to the conjunction of Mars, an enemy. In fact, they're not at all comfortable with each other. This is also considered a planetary war. So we see that the planet Mars is in fact the best planet for this chart, ruling the 4th house of Scorpio and the 9th house of Aries. This is called the Yoga Karaka. And there is a planetary war ensuing between these two planets. Mars is in the house of a friend, being in Pisces, and Mars is in the dark karmic star of Rahu. So that is a bit of a blemish. Mars and Rahu are not friendly, and it's not good for what we call the Ucha quality of the planet in terms of its stellar rulership, in terms of the star that it is posited in. Here we see Mars, not only in conjunction with its bitter enemy of Mercury, in retrogression and debilitated, it is also in the star of Rahu. So this Rahu is not a good quality. Rahu is what we call tamasa ucha. Tamasa means inertia, which, if we look at the quality of Mars, its natural inherent quality being a very vibrant, fiery, active planet, it is in the sign of a friend. But if we look at the qualities here, the elemental sort of placement here, being in water, that reduces its efficiency somewhat. Being in the 8th house is really not a good position. And then being in the star of the Rahu then gives it that tamasic quality, that laziness, that inability to really have its yogacaraka or princely planet function in accordance with its own nature. It's dragged down. That vitality is dragged down by being in this specific area. Now, here we call Rahu the jiva, or the soul of Rahu. If we look at the quality of the planet itself, let's just isolate that planet, the princely planet. We could even call it a kingly planet. It is considered the best planet when a planet rules the quadrature, the angle of the chart, simultaneously to ruling the triangular zone of the chart. And in this case, the trine is Aries, and the square is Scorpio, that fourth angle. Then we see it endowed with the fantastic qualities, but it's blemished here in the 8th house, the company of enemies. It's in close conjunction to Pluto, that's like a force majeure. We know that the death of Pluto is going to be through its finances associated with the Mercury, and also the position of Pluto here, which is very transformative, again ruling this 4th house. So it's intimately connected with Mars. Both of these planets are powerfully influencing the destiny of the finances of Greece. And don't forget, this 8th house of the horoscope is one's shared resources, the debts that one has, the partnerships one has on a financial level. We see that's tied in here karmically with the North Node being the spirit of Mars. And then we look at the star lord of Rahu. We see that this particular planet, Rahu, is in the star Purva Bhadrapada. This is ruled by Jupiter. So Jupiter, here ruling the 8th house, in the 8th house, is endowed with great strength. It is what's called the Sharira, or the body of Mars. So we look at the star lord of Mars, that gives us the spirit. Then we look at the star lord of the star lord. Star lord of Rahu is Jupiter. The Ucha, or the quality, is improved there because the tamasic planet Rahu is stationed in a star, or a stellar portion of the zodiac, ruled by Jupiter, which is what we call a Sattvika planet. So as a Sattvika planet, that is, it's not much of a consolation given the problem. And I've focused here on the 4th house will have quite a bit to say about the country's fixed assets, the property and that sort of thing. It's hard to escape the 8th house problems here. Everything pretty much is there, and then because everything is there, then we realize predominantly that the star lords of any other planets, including these, are going to probably point to this 8th house. This is how we get a thematic feel for the destiny of a nation or a person. Now, I'm still focusing on this, the finances, also the fact that the interval now is a 17-year cycle of Mercury ruling the second house and the 11th house. These houses, the finance houses, equally disrupted. If we take a look over here, these planets are so close. If we look at this ninth harmonic chart, we call it the Navamsha, the map. Here we see Mercury and Mars in the sign of the Sun. So, the sign of the Sun, Leo. Where's the Sun? As I said, it points again to the 8th house by being there. This is called a Navamsha dispositor. It's an interesting exercise. You look at the position of planets in your horoscope in this ninth house. This ninth harmonic, the Navamsha map. And you take the ruler of that. So here, Mercury, we can get a quick view of its Navamsha position in Leo. Inescapable, this conjunction. They are too close. They're in the same star, in the same Navamsha. So this is a battle that's going to go on. Navamsha really is the unfoldment of the map in time. It's a harmonic of these planets and their positions, a harmonic in space and time. This is the flowering of the chart. Greece doesn't escape this. In fact, these 8th house positions of Mercury and Mars come back to that nodal axis in harmonica. That's not an instrument you play. That's what I'm talking about here, is the 9th harmonic vibration of these two planets are oscillating here and activating this sign of Leo. So we see the Sun here. Everything points to this 8th house. And during this cycle, up till the 5th of June 2020, hopefully they'll get 2020 vision there at that time, we see the movement then to Ketu. Now, it's interesting because we're only at around 2015 now. So we'd be saying here that these problems associated with the debilitation of Mercury, the financial dilemmas and the massive losses that are seen here, touching pretty much every aspect of life for Greece, continue up until 2020. I don't actually think we've seen the austerities yet, because as I said at the outset, Ketu here is the planet of austerities. Let's look at Ketu in isolation for a moment. I really like this software, by the way. I've got a few different software packages. Here we can just click on the planet and up comes a very elaborate and detailed overview of this planet Ketu. Here we see that no sort of aggregate strength is given. We have to, with these nodes, Ketu and Rahu, or the south and north node, just ascertain some of the strengths ourselves. Firstly, Ketu, as we know, acts for Mars. Interesting, huh? We keep coming back here. Ketu is the agent for Mars. What's the star of Ketu? The star of Ketu is... By the way, I've just noticed, before I get onto that, an error. I was looking at the Prashna map today when I said that the moon was in Shravana. The moon is actually in Rohini over here. Again, it's in its own star because today they're in triangular position to each other. But I just wanted to correct that initial error and now come back to this overview of Ketu by looking here at Ketu in its agency for Mars. So it acts as a yoga karaka, or a kingly planet as well here. That's quite good, being in this particular sign. As far as its stellar positioning, Purva Palguni, the star of Venus, which rules the 10th house of the government, exalted. Now that's nice, in the 8th house. So there could be some fairly dramatic changes that come as a result of that specific planet coming through. That's a 7-year cycle that will take Greece up to 2027, when Venus, the actual exalted planet, ruling the 10th house, will come into its own 20-year cycle. I think we're waiting till around 2027 before we see any significant changes. Of course, we have to verify that with the gotcha or transits of the planets, and I'll go into that in a moment. But here you can get to see some of the strengths. If you take this, there are a number of different metrics we can use on planets to establish the dignity, the strength. I really like this system of astrology. To those of you Western astrologers who may have sort of hung in here a little bit with me on this analysis, but I really like the idea of a planet not just having relationship with all the other planets. Western astrologers do forget that a planet has qualities like human beings. It does have a personality, a persona, and an overlord. And that planet, like human beings, can enter into its own mood. We have to study the relationship of the planet to itself. That's where earlier I took you to that Navamsha position where we were looking at Mercury. If you study a planet in its own harmonic divisions, its own harmonic charts, you'll start to see a specific strength gained as an aggregate strength. We also look at moods of planets. Just like humans have moods, these planets have moods. And we can look, for example, at Mercury here in its debilitated, yet because it's retrograde in the early part of the sign, it's gained old age. And here are the strengths we talk about here. This is called Shadbala. And you can measure the metrics of a planet in any varying numbers of strengths. I normally use 16. This one here, Shadbala. I think that's 10 or 16 sources of strength for a planet. And here we get a percentage. We see that Mercury really falls under the 1.0 level. It's in its old age, but it does have some power in terms of the what we call bindus or points, what we call Ashtakavaga, 6 points. So there's a mixture of results here, and the same thing here with this Ketu. Ketu is a little more different, as you can see here. It doesn't get any divisional strength through this. It does get divisional strength. I shouldn't say that, but it doesn't have metrics in the same way the planets do to give you a percentage of that. So we have to go in here and just look for ourselves at the strength. Here we see Ketu's gone to Libra. So if I could just point that out, if you take the position here in Leo and then look at its harmonic vibration in Libra, then we see there that there's a sextile, generally a sextile aspect, which harmonizes between that fundamental position in the Rasi chart, the actual chart itself, and the harmonic position there in the 11th house. Mind you, Leo from Libra is a karmically obstructive position, and therefore I still say that around 2020 is when you might see some of these big difficulties. Here we were looking at the quality of Ketu, which will start at that time, and its star lord is Venus. This becomes the soul. Venus is exalted. That's very, very good. It's powerful for it, but it's not good in terms of the quality, guna quality, because this one here is a Rajasic, and this is Tamasic. It's better, as we saw before, like with Rahu, stationed in the stellar position of Jupiter, for this to also be the same, but it's not. Then it would gain its Sattvika strength. Here it's only gaining, it's only really being diminished. A Tamasic planet in the Rajasic Ucha or quality. So that doesn't work well for it. So I'm saying I think there's a lot of heavy karma coming to Greece, and we haven't seen the worst of that, and that will probably take place in the period 2020 to 2027. Now, getting back to that other chart, we see the transits here which are moving along, and we normally take the position of the moon, what's called the Chandra Lagna. Let's see what happens here if we make this the lunar sign, and I can do different here, Chandra. We can look at different perspectives. that's a fault in the program. It should actually make that number 1. Don't worry, let's just go back to the standard chart. And we see here that the transits of Mars and Sun, full moon just now in this, which is when this happened, build up of the full moon, the incredible power. Have a look at that full moon is in Capricorn in the triangular position. As we saw here, actually the full moon was a couple of days ago when it was in the 8th house, which is interesting. It's full now, but that's just showing some of the legalities that they're going through. Still pretty bright. But this is the interesting thing. We see the full moon at this time, just as they're defaulting on their payment to the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, taking place in this 2-8 axis. 2-8, second house from the moon, full moon 8th house. And the new moon will take place, I believe, around the 16th of this month. That will take place in the, I'm thinking, I know tropically it's in the sign of Gemini, but we have to stick with the map here. I think it'll be in the 3rd house. That's contracts and agreements. So, the new moons, these lunations, give us an insight if that does in fact happen. Let me just quickly create another chart here and show you how this software works. Let's just go to the 16th. And I am curious to see when and where that particular the new moon takes place. It's actually showing that it takes place a little earlier than that. Let's go back a day, because I want to see exactly where that new moon is, whether it's in the sidereally anyhow. Yeah, see, the new moon takes place, let's have a look here, early morning hours of the 16th, I think. Let's just go 1 a.m. Here, 16th. This is for my locality. Keep going. This is how we have to rectify and see. If we go around 8 a.m. on that date. Still there, so I think we've got to see when the sun leaves this place, because I think the moon is, if we go 11 a.m., I should be able to calculate this in my mind. See, the new moon does take place on the 16th. We'd have to say it's in both Gemini, and it'll be giving a bit of an energy mix of these two signs. Again, so that will be the 2nd house, 3rd house, finances and contracts in any case. And that's how I would see it. These immediate transits, of course, that's two very fiery planets in the 2nd house of finances, income, full moon in that 8th house, new moon in the 2nd and 3rd house. So it's all happening across this 2nd and 8th house axis, as we would expect with the sort of problems that they're having here. The other big transits we normally look at for longer cycles are the transits of Saturn and Jupiter here. Saturn here is in the 7th house. This is called Septimi. That commenced in November 2014. It goes for 2 years, and then it hits the very malefic 8th house. But don't forget, with respect to the moon, Saturn becomes the Yoga Karaka. It is going to be really, really tough, but I don't think it's not going to be as tough as when it moves into this 8th house. And Jupiter's sign of Sagittarius is not friendly. So you've got to see some really, really big problems again there. So all this 8th house stuff happening to Greece at this time. I want to introduce this just as an opener to some of the tutorials I'm going to be giving here for those of you that are interested enough, how I actually work. How you can see I'm not always systematic. I'm more a thematic Vedic astrologer. I like to look at the themes that are prevalent at the time. If there's a question, you've got to holistically integrate the whole chart, but you've got to zoom in on themes. And what you'll find is that all of the planets will often point pretty similar theme or a couple of patterns there that will substantiate what it is you're trying to look for. So there again, the longer cycle of Saturn is definitely showing what's going on. And then the Jupiter cycle as well, we see that that is moving in the third house here. Exalted, Jupiter's the lord of the 8th house. And the 11th house, 8th house again. 3rd house exalted, very, very powerful. And the 3rd house, which is where Jupiter's been transiting, is considered one of the worst positions of the zodiac for the 8th lord. 8th lord should be weakened rather than strengthened if you're to get good results. And have a look here. We see the transit of the lunar ruler Venus having just transited within 1 degree of this 8th lord. So we see the debt to the nation, to those key points in the horoscope, really again pointing and substantiating that debt crisis that we're seeing here. I hope I've given you some insight into the way I work using the Greek chart as a map. We can continue this. We'll be looking at a whole lot of other research and conceptual axioms that I'm developing based upon some of the traditional texts, but also just utilizing common observation. That is your best tool in this game if you want to, excel in the system of Vedic astrology. And next time I want to go into another key sort of point on that, and I'll finish up on that, and that is that the technique is no substitute for the intuitive developments that happen as a result of initiation and good mentorship. So I'd like to talk about that. There's a whole elaborate system that can help you to become better astrologers, and using these techniques in tandem with the flowering of your intuition, that is when the real magic happens, and I hope I can help facilitate that for you. Visit my website. As I said, it's a Western style website, but we've got some Vedic stuff going on there, astrology.com.au. Look forward to your company here again. Add me, click me, subscribe to me. Love to have your company again. Bye-bye now.